Jamaica, what
yes,
do you say?
in Jamaica we say
Every mickle make a muckle.
Yes.
And that's so true.
Welcome to the Shan and Tam Show.
Today we have a very special guest with us, Marcia Smith. We're so excited. Marcia is a social worker, social justice advocate, and strategist. We are here with her today to talk about a very personal topic. Through Marcia's story and the information she will share with us today, we hope to raise some awareness about a personal issue affecting women and women around us.
Welcome, Marcia.
Thank you, ladies. I'm excited.
We're excited to have you. And it's a very interesting and dear topic, I know, to you that we're going to be talking about today. So let's get started. Let's just start by learning a little more about you. Tell us about yourself and how you grew up.
Okay, so I was born in Jamaica. I was born in Kingston, but then I grew up in the country and came to Canada when I was 7 years old with my mom, my sister, and my brother. Actually, my mom was here first, and then she sent for us. And so it was tough growing up here in a new country. And then we ended up living in Scarborough, which back then was so desolate. There was no very, little life form, and it was far from everything in Toronto. But went to school in Scarborough, grew up in Toronto community housing, so that had its own challenges. But that whole experience actually steered me to where I am today. So I really embrace it and welcome that experience.
Absolutely.
Right. So your mom then, I take it, was she a single mom?
Yes, mom was a single mom, 3 kids. My mom actually had the 3 of us by the time she was 20 years old.
Wow.
So she was very young, and then she came to Canada when I was 2, and she had me at 20, so she was 20, she was 22, 23 when she
Very
came
young.
here.
So she's a young mother, so she grew with you guys.
Exactly. It wasn't until I became an adult that I realized the sacrifices she actually made.
Right.
Because to come here at 22, 23, and then, work domestic work, and then send for your 3 children within 5 years, that's huge. But, when you're young, you don't... Exactly. When you're young, you don't understand that until you're older. You can appreciate it.
So there were a lot of challenges growing up around that. So I would think that, in your intro, Shanique mentioned that you're a social worker, social justice advocate.
Yes,
I would suggest that maybe your upbringing had something to do with that sort of chosen career path. How did that influence what you decided to do?
I would say so. I think there were so many injustices, from the school yard, the microaggressions at school, living in community housing, social housing, and all the, the racism, the systemic oppression, and the things that I saw my mother go through, having to work 2 jobs, having to, I was saying to my sister the other day, I remember, very specific rules. Don't bring nobody to the house. When I call from work, I'm going to let the phone ring once, then don't answer, but then I'm going to call back. You know it's me.
Right.
Because back then there was no caller ID.
Right.
And we were still so young. She really shouldn't have left us alone, but what are you going to do? You have to work.
Right.
You have to feed the family. So I think being raised in that environment taught me how to be really strong.
Yes.
How to be very vocal and just very perceptive around things that, like social justice issues.
Right.
So your experiences really shaped your identity really in
Absolutely.
moving forward in social work.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's amazing. That's good, Marcia.
Yeah.
So we're here to talk about women's health, particularly gynecological cancers. So with Tam and I in our research, we realized that there are 5 main types of cancers. Can you speak a little bit about that?
The 5 main types of cancers are cervical,
Okay.
ovarian, uterine, vaginal, and vulvar cancer.
Okay.
Wow.
I didn't know that there was a vagina cancer.
Yes, and most people don't really, because these cancers, they're silent,
Right.
and they're not as, I guess, popular as breast cancer, all the other cancers.
Right,
Okay.
right.
But they do exist for women,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Okay, that's good. That's good information to know.
Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about your own mother's journey with uterine cancer?
So in 2013, I got a call while I was at work, actually my last day at work, preparing to go on vacation the Saturday, the following day. And I got a call from my brother saying, that he'd spoken to my mom and he didn't like how she sounded. And I lived fairly close to where I work. And my mom lived with me, so I asked my boss, I said, listen, I have to run home.
Yes.
I think I was calling her and I wasn't getting her, so I started to get very worried. So I decided to go home, but I also decided to call the ambulance on my way, just this thing.
Instinct.
Gut
Instinct
feeling,
said, gut
yeah.
feeling, because it's not like her not to answer the phone.
Yes.
So I got home and realized that she had been frothing at the mouth, like she'd been slumped over on the chair, so you can imagine.
Yes, the
Getting
shock.
home, yeah. So and I got there before the ambulance. That's how probably that's how fast I drove.
Right.
But to say that, so anyways, we got her to the hospital. The ambulance came, and then and I'm traveling the next day, so we don't know what's wrong with her. And so through testing, and that was the year of the ice storm, so there was all these complications.
Everything was shut down.
Everything was shut down. She had to do a biopsy, and that's when we realized. So fast forward, that happened December 13th. We didn't actually get the diagnosis of uterine cancer until February. So they were just running tests, and we had no idea what was wrong with her.
Wow.
And that's when we found out.
And I can't just imagine the anxiety that the family was going through because
It was really rough. But then I remember my mom being a proud Jamaican woman who's very secretive. You don't talk about your health.
Right.
It's just this thing, right, with that generation.
It's a culture thing.
It's a culture thing. Your
Right.
children don't need to know. And so I remember she had said maybe 2 weeks prior to that she had a biopsy, and I'm like, Mom, a biopsy? Why? And she's like, well, I started bleeding. My period came back again. And I said, Mom, you're 67. How could your period be back? And she's like, no, just some bleeding. So I said, Mom, that sounds pretty serious. Again, I have no idea.
Right.
Yes.
I was not familiar with this type of
Right.
cancer, right? So I'm not even thinking cancer. I'm thinking, well, something's wrong.
Yes.
So she was like, yes, all right, I'm just going to do it, and then they'll find out. So I said, okay, well, let me know when the appointment is, I'll take you. And that was that. Fast forward, we get to realize that's why.
So it leads me to ask you about the symptoms. I mean, she had that as one symptom that sort of manifested itself, which you had no idea about.
No.
What are some of the typical symptoms that you could speak to in terms of?
So some of
Looking
the
for-
symptoms, the main one is abnormal or irregular bleeding.
Okay.
So people who are like menopausal age, which would be my mom, if you start to bleed, that's
a
a
red
red
flag.
flag.
Right.
So younger people who are not menopausal, they have abnormal bleeding. So bleeding in between your periods. Painful intercourse is another sign. Extreme pain in your pelvic area and your abdominal area.
Okay.
So, and then the challenge with that is, so it's very silent, unless it's not like you can do a pap test or, a topical ultrasound and find out, oh, you have cancer of your uterus.
Right.
So that's why by the time most women find out that they're diagnosed with this,
It's too late.
it's progressed.
Right, right. And so diagnosis then, because it sounds to me like you just mentioned that it's not easy.
No.
Right?
No.
What are some of the ways in which it's primarily diagnosed then?
So if you have a good doctor, and that's part of the challenge with being women of color. There was actually an article written by the Wellesley Institute about color-coded healthcare system. So one of the challenges, and maybe we'll get into this later in our interview about Black women being diagnosed and having very poor outcomes,
Right.
is when a lot of black women or women of color have fibroids, so you're used to the pain, the discomfort, and you're used to the heavy bleeding. So it becomes just part of, so sometimes they experience it and they don't think it's
like
related.
a normal thing,
It's a
but
normal.
in a
So we
abnormal
normalize
way,
it, right? And so, and as black women of color, we also normalize pain and discomfort, and we don't normally self-care or think that, you know, we're strong, we're supposed to be strong, and society tells us that we're supposed to be so strong, but those are some signs. So if you have a really good doctor and you complain, you know, I've been feeling really abdominal pain or, you know, heavy bleeding or abnormal bleeding, they really should send you for an ultrasound.
Right.
And then so an ultrasound, just a topical ultrasound, is not
It's
always
not enough.
effective. Not enough. You need to do a transvaginal ultrasound.
Okay.
And what that will pick up is possible polyps
Okay.
or a thick endometrial lining. So a thickness in the around the lining of your uterus, which then could lead them to believe there's something going on that needs further investigation.
Okay.
And then that's when you would probably get a biopsy done. So they biopsy, they take tissue from from your uterine lining, and then they put it under microscope, and then they're able at that point to determine there is some cancer cells.
Okay.
And what about treatment options then?
So again, this type of cancer, the treatment options vary. So if you find out at an early stage, which is usually if you're younger, then you can, you know, there's more options that, you know, you can do. There's radiation. There's different options. Your prognosis is better, but it's not necessarily curable. It's not, right? So it's not, well, your prognosis is better because you're younger. It all depends. Every situation's different. It depends on where the cancer is. Are they in your lymph nodes? Have they spread? Is it stage 1, where they can possibly give you treatment, topical treatment, and you don't have to go through chemo and surgery. But when the cancer is advanced, the problem becomes, then you have to do a hysterectomy, a hysterectomy.
To take everything out.
To take everything out. So then the prognosis becomes better. So there's that fine line between, is it curable, or can you prolong your life by getting, I mean, if there's something in your uterus, they suggest the treatment option is remove the entire uterus.
Okay. And then again, as you said, it depends on the age, right?
Your age, there's so many
if
factors.
If people are younger, you might be thinking, okay, that means I might not be able to have any more kids.
Well, this is a challenge.
Right?
And with again, this culture, the racial disparities with black women of color, that's usually the first option they give you.
Right.
You know, take out the entire like the entire thing. So you lose your ovaries, your tubes. So the childbearing again becomes
it
a
becomes
factor.
difficult.
It's a real dilemma.
It's a real dilemma.
And it's interesting because talking to you, I can see that you have a lot of passion, right? And you're a social advocate for different causes. So can you tell us a little bit, why do you think uterine cancer, the rate is rising so drastically in black women?
I think there's several factors. I think one goes back to some things that I raised earlier, that we're prone to normalize pain and discomfort. And sometimes medical practitioners don't take us seriously. So we go in with a condition and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's normal, do this, do that. So they dismiss it, right? Our concerns. Again, too, like myself, I can share that I have fibroids. So I am constantly having to check in. But then a lot of the times I don't know, and I'm thinking, is it my fibroids why I'm feeling this discomfort, or is it something else?
Something else.
So for me, I'm very proactive, but for some women, they just live with it because that's all they know. And so those are some factors. Other factors are socioeconomic status. So a lot of women that are possibly living in poverty or doesn't have the determinants of health. So, you know, you're probably not housed. You're probably unemployed. You probably have all these other issues that sometimes your health, especially endometrial health, becomes secondary.
Right. Because you have to do other things, housing, different things.
Right. And so sometimes the options too that practitioners offer us is not the same as our counterparts. So if let's say, for instance, a white woman in her 30s or 40s goes in and says to the doctor, I'm feeling severe cramps, I'm bleeding abnormally, right away, well, we should do this, we should do that, right?
Right.
So they're addressed, they're attended to. While with us, it's, well, do you have fibroids? Is there a history of fibroids?
Right.
Yes.
Because
Right?
those are like some of the common things for black women, and so yeah.
Yeah, so, right? So, and I think even with my mom, she probably went to her doctor and said, you know, I'm spotting, or I'm having, and, you know, probably gave her the, well, how long has this been happening? Well, she's probably not, you know, well, maybe at that point, talk to one of your daughters, right?
Yes.
But sort of that, okay, Veronica, you can come back, and then we'll do an ultrasound. And then that, I mean, thank God her doctor was
proactive about it.
Yeah, but it still took time. Like now, when I go to my doctor, I'm like, okay, so I'm feeling this. I'm telling my doctor what I want.
You want.
So I need an ultrasound, and I need to do a biopsy, and I'm choosing so I'm researching, right, which gynecological care I want. So I want the doctor that's known for the best right? So I'm telling her, this is where I'd like to be referred.
Right.
And you know what? That's crucial because you're a self-advocate, right? But a lot of women may not feel as strong to advocate. Yeah, especially regarding issues like that.
And we need to, and that's why I'm constantly trying to raise awareness and to let women see that it's our health, it's our body, and you know your body. You know when something is just not right. And so, you know, that's why I really want to say to women, if you know it's not, you feel it, you go in there and you tell your doctor, and you don't leave, you demand, like, I need this care.
Yes.
I need to see a gynecologist. I need to find out what's going on. Don't let them dismiss you or give you some medication, Tylenol, and tell you to go home and come back if you're still feeling it. You know, really follow through and see, because, you know, by the time you find out, it might be too late. The other thing is diabetes. We're prone to diabetes in the black community and in our culture. And so a lot of doctors will say, oh, well, it's your diabetes or you're obese.
Right.
Yes.
Right? So those are some challenges. If you are diabetic, if you are obese, you're at a greater risk. However, it's not the all that ends all.
Right.
So because I'm obese and because I'm diabetic, doesn't mean that I'm supposed to have cancer.
Yeah,
exactly.
Or that's the root of every problem that you have.
Oh, so diabetes, it's because you lose some weight and come back.
Yes, so you normalize it,
And
right?
as you're talking, it's coming to mind that I guess your social support system, your family, and the people that really has a bearing on what the outcomes could be too.
Absolutely. And if you're not, like my mother wasn't comfortable talking about this.
Yeah.
It wasn't until it got to the point where she realized, well, I probably can't do this biopsy without my daughter knowing
So
because how is she going to get home?
something.
So she had to. But so, you know, again, part of the advocacy work, part of the outreach and the awareness is for us to let's talk. Let black women, we don't talk about, you know, these issues, and there's shame, and it's cultural. But there is no shame in it.
There is no
need
shame.
to talk.
We have to break the silence, right? We have to break the silence and educate and to empower each other.
Absolutely.
Which leads us to the question, because you talk a lot about research. Do you have any particular research to support why there's such a disparity among black women and their diagnosis?
Well, see, what happens in Canada, and I've contacted all these different health departments and, you know, the Cancer Society, and why are we not having race-based studies or you know, in Canada to identify which race is most likely to contract certain disease. We don't do that. Well, in America they do. This is how a lot of the studies is Americanized, right? So a lot of the studies that I get is from American Journal entries and American stats. And so while we may have better health care, so some of the issues in America would be poor health care, right? So they don't have insurance to go to the doctor, to go to a good doctor. Again, socioeconomic issues. Well, we have that here too, right? So we focus on America a lot because we tend to think that being in Canada, we're so above that, and there aren't any systemic barriers and systemic racism when it comes to healthcare. There is. So for Black women, again, it goes back to the same things we talked about earlier, not being taken serious when we go to with our
doctor.
complaints, right? Being raised in a culture where you're supposed to be strong, and you know, you can do it, man. It's okay. It's just this, right? Dismissing our and self-care, right? That most of us don't self-care,
Right.
and so with studies, with specific numbers, it's really hard in Canada. But I can tell you, in America, the study shows that percentage-wise, white women actually, this is what's interesting, white women actually get diagnosed more with uterine cancer, with endometrial cancers. They get diagnosed more. But when Black women are diagnosed, their outcomes is
the mortality
rate
is higher.
Much higher.
So
And I think the last study, there was a Black doctor, Dr. Dahl, in the U.S., and for every 5 cancer positive of uterine cancer, so let's say 3 were white women and 2 were Black women, the 3 white women would have better prognosis. The 2 Black women would die.
Oh, that's
so that's very telling.
Absolutely.
So there's no research that's current in Canada.
Current research.
Isn't that
in
interesting?
Canada.
And the emphasis that we place on our health care and the pride that we have is that you
Absolutely.
would want to think that
There would be more
there
research.
would be
to
more
support it.
research and race-based data, because we're also so diverse,
We're
right?
so diverse here, and there is no research, there's no data that substantiates and that can raise awareness to say, well, Black women, you're more prone,
Right.
right? There's part of the other sign is early menstrual. So if you start your period very early, then you're also at risk. You may be at risk. But studies in the U.S. shows that Black girls tend to start their periods earlier.
Okay.
So what we find is with young Black girls starting their period early, they're more prone to having more estrogen, right? Because you started earlier, your body builds more estrogen. And so they haven't been able to finalize and to say, is it biology, why Black, is it how we're made up, right? Or is it social factors? Is it our environment?
I see. Right.
So that study is ongoing in the U.S., but unfortunately in Canada, we don't have that. There's no stats. So it's just us raising awareness in our communities and talking about these issues.
Right. So, also, Marcia, I know that just from talking to you before, you know, there is some information about age disparities as well. I mean, as we started talking earlier, you talked about the incidences of people being at a younger age versus an older age. So what can you tell us about that whole area in terms of the age disparity and the diagnosis of women with this type of cancer?
So younger women being diagnosed with uterine cancer is rare. It's not. I actually have a niece who was recently diagnosed this January, and she's in her 20s with stage 1 uterine cancer. So while it's rare, it's increasing for some reason. This is where it goes back to, is it environmental? Is it our diet? What are the factors that's contributing to this rise, this increase in positive diagnosis for uterine cancer? And so with lack of research, we really don't know. There's no definitive answers right now. So it's, again, the signs. So in some young people's particular cases, it could be that they've always had abnormal bleeding and maybe PCOS, maybe, maybe they've always had very irregular periods, but then it's just been chalked up to your periods irregular.
Yeah, and that's normal again. Yeah, right.
So no follow through until you start to feel pain. The abdominal pain is usually the first sign that something is wrong.
Right.
And so again, it's rare for younger people, but it is increasing, and that's something that's still being studied. Most women that end up with a positive diagnosis, is usually menopause. It's usually you get it after menopause.
Okay.
So
we're Caribbean people,
Yes.
Jamaicans.
Yes.
We're proud of our yachting background.
yes.
And you mentioned your mom being from Jamaica and so on. And I know just based on your background that you've done some work there, which we'll talk about later.
Yes.
But what can you tell us about what your observations have been about people in the Caribbean, maybe Jamaica in particular,
Yeah.
and their experience in this area versus here in Canada?
Oh, that's a whole other segment. But so my experience with Jamaica, when I first went to the Jamaican Cancer Society to say, listen, I have this money, I'd love to donate it to some families. And then when they started giving the stats, and even just, especially in the rural parts of Jamaica, just getting women to a doctor.
Was a struggle.
And I can see that, yeah.
Right, so here in North America, a diagnosis of breast cancer, let's say for instance, is pretty, it's normal, and the outcomes, the prognosis is usually fairly well. It's not, people aren't normally getting breast cancer, especially at an early stage, and dying from it as much, right?
Right.
In Jamaica, a diagnosis of such cancers is usually a death sentence if you have no money.
Because
and that's a big issue, because
healthcare is all about your economic status.
Yeah.
And so what they found was they had to do mobile medicine where they'd go into the rural areas because these women couldn't afford taxi to go to a doctor. So they would wait till it was so bad. By the time they got diagnosed, that prognosis was poor.
Yes.
So and treatment, your medication. I met women who were breaking pills to make them stretch, right? Their medication. I had one woman that we had given the first money to, 25 years old, had just had a baby, and the baby was breastfeeding just fine, and then all of a sudden the baby stopped feeding on her left breast. And she kept wondering every time she tried to put her breast would be engorged with milk.
Wow.
And every time she put the baby to feed, the baby wasn't feeding. And she couldn't figure out, why is this baby not feeding? Like screaming, excruciating screams, like not even attempting. Finally, her breast became so sore, she ended up going to the doctor. They found out she had breast cancer, and that's why in that breast.
Oh, wow.
By the time she found out, her prognosis, 2 years later, she died.
No.
They tried all kinds of treatment.
Wow.
Young woman.
Right.
I mean, so by the time, it was 2 years from her feeling that pain to going to the doctor and finding out, and then she died. So we were able to, the money that we raise in helping women, it's not a lot of money because it's a new foundation, but it does give them some level of dignity.
Marcia, that's interesting how you provided us that explanation of how women in Jamaica and even the Caribbean, how they're impacted differently. Because when we look at our life here and we talk about the disparities in the US as well, to say that yes, even though we focus so much on healthcare here, we still don't have racialized or our research supporting Black women. But in Jamaica, women are struggling so much they can't even go to the hospital, right? Because you spoke about them not having any money, and even though you're saying it's not a lot of money that you raise, trust me, every little bit adds up. Right? And in Jamaica,
in Jamaica we say every mickle make a muckle.
Yes. And that's so true.
It is so true. So you know what? It's really, you're doing really good work, and I know we're gonna talk a little bit more about it in our next interview with you about some of the things that you have done to really keep your mother's memory alive.
Great, thank
you. It's been a very interesting discussion so far, Marcia. We want to thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It does not end, Shan and Tam fam. We're going to pick up this discussion again next time when we talk to Marcia. She'll give us more information. She'll share more of her story. And we have to remind you, subscribe, like, and share, and
hit the notification bell.
that little bell, people. So we want to leave it here for today, but join us next time when we do pick up this discussion with Marcia to extend this very important topic about women's health and some of the issues that are affecting us. See you next time. Shan and Tam fam.
Take care.
Bye. Thanks for watching the show today, Shan Tam fam.
Ensure you hit the subscribe button, like, and share this video.
Send the link to a friend in WhatsApp, Facebook, or even Instagram fam. And of course, don't miss when we post a new video, so hit that notifications button.
Yes. Also, check out the details box for this video for all the links for Shan and Tam's social media and blog